All right, let's dive into a really fascinating case out of Ghana. A man named Igbo Noah makes a prophecy, and now he's on trial. So, how does a statement of faith end up as a potential crime? Today, we're going to unpack a case that's right at the intersection of belief, law, and public safety.
You know, this single sentence really gets to the heart of it. What started as just words, a prophecy, has spiraled into a full-blown prosecution. Igbo Noah's future? It's not really in his hands anymore. It's now being weighed and decided by judges and lawyers. The stakes here are, well, they're incredibly high.
So, let's back up. How did we get here? How does a prophecy lead to a possible prison sentence? We'll start with our first section, a prophet's fate. This is where we set up the core conflict.
Okay, so it all comes down to this man, Igbo Noah. He made some very public statements, prophecies, and that led to his arrest. The really tricky question the court has to answer is this: when does someone's personal belief, when spoken out loud, cross the line and become a public threat? That's the complex knot they've got to untangle.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the direction of this entire case, whether it even goes to a full trial or not, pretty much hinges on one single thing. So let's look at Section 2, the deciding factor. This is the one piece of the puzzle that could change everything.
And here it is, a psychiatric evaluation. The court has ordered one for Igbo Noah, and this isn't just some routine procedure. This is the absolute pivot point for the entire case. Seriously, the findings from this one assessment are going to determine everything that happens next.
This evaluation really boils down to two huge questions for the court. First, is Igbo Noah mentally competent enough to even stand trial? Can he participate in his own defense? And second, when he made those statements, did he actually understand the real-world impact his words could have? The answers to these two questions will basically chart his entire future. So this evaluation, it's like a critical fork in the road. And that brings us to Section 3, 3 potential verdicts. Because depending on what the doctors find, this case could go down 3 very, very different paths.
So what are these paths? Think of them as 3 completely different futures for Igbo Noah. Path 1 is a full trial. Path 2 means the focus shifts to medical treatment over punishment. And Path 3, well, that's kind of a middle ground that involves restrictions. Let's break down exactly what each of these really means.
First up, path number 1. If the evaluation says Igbo Noah is mentally fit, then the case barrels ahead to a full trial. The prosecution's argument is that his statements were false communication likely to cause public fear and panic, which under Ghanaian law is a serious charge. In short, he'd be facing the full force of the legal system. Then you have the second possibility. What if the evaluation finds that actually Noah's mental state did affect his judgment when he made the prophecy? If that's the case, the whole trial takes a dramatic turn. The focus completely shifts away from punishment and lands on treatment. The system would prioritize mental health care and rehabilitation, not a prison sentence.
And finally, we've got this third potential outcome. This path is less about punishing what he did in the past and way more about protecting the public in the future. In this scenario, the court might skip a harsh sentence and instead issue really specific restrictions or warnings on his future public statements. The main goal here would be public safety and just preventing any future panic.
But here's the thing. No matter which of those 3 paths the court ends up choosing, this case is already having a ripple effect way beyond the courtroom. Let's kind of zoom out in our final section, number 4, the lasting mark, and just look at the broader impact here. Just by bringing this case to trial, the state has kicked off a huge nationwide conversation in Ghana. It's forcing people to ask some really tough questions, like what's the role of religious speech in a modern society? Where does freedom of belief end and public safety begin? This case is going to be a reference point for these debates for years and years, long after the verdict is in.
And that leaves us with this final central question. Where do you draw that line? At what point does a statement of faith become a public menace? There's no easy answer, right? And that's exactly what makes the Igbo Noah case so compelling. It's a question that societies all over the world are grappling with. And this trial really puts it square in the spotlight. It really makes